This is Performance Anxiety on the Pantheon Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Mark. And today's guest makes me appreciate my childhood. Lincoln Barr joins me to talk about a lot of stuff. He knew early on that music was his calling. He identified with the musicians he saw on TV before he could even play music. But he went to college for English and not music. He also met his wife at this time, and those two things were foundational for his musical style. He moved to Seattle and started the band Red Jacket Mine. Turns out, the families of the Red Jacket Miners weren't exactly thrilled about the band. But fans of the music were. And the members of Red Jacket Mine have been an important part of Lincoln's life ever since. After a few albums, the band ended. Life happened and people moved, including Lincoln and his wife, and it just became too difficult to continue. When he decided to start writing solo material, Lincoln changed everything. He confronted traumas from an abusive childhood, and it changed how he wrote. It even changed how the music sounded, whether it's his solo albums or the soundtrack he wrote for a fascinating documentary called The Past Is Never Dead. Must be that classic combo of dark minor key jazz and child abuse. But seriously, the music is a left turn from a lot of the stuff that I usually listen to. I highly recommend Lincoln's latest album, Forfeit the Prize. Links to buy it and to follow him on social media are at lincolnbarmusic.com. And you can follow the podcast at Performance ANX on Twitter and Instagram. If you'd like to support the show, try ko-fi.com/performanceanxiety or buy merch at performanceanx.threadless.com. And I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did. It's Lincoln Barr on Performance Anxiety on the Pantheon Podcast Network.
Okay. So it's just sort of like, hi, this is who I am, and check out my new record, and thanks for listening to Performance Anxiety, or is that? Okay, cool. All right. Yeah, I've noticed. All right. This is Lincoln Barr, and you're listening to the Performance Anxiety Podcast. Check out my new record, Forfeit the Prize, out now on Two Roads Records.
I'm a one-man deal. I record it, research it, edit it all by myself.
And you're productive, man. Yeah, and you do your research. I was telling my wife about this last night, and I was like, he really listens, right? Like, I've been so impressed by especially, like I said, you've spoken to a number of my friends, and so these are people that I know their work really, really well. And I'm like, he really goes deep, and I love it.
Oh, good. I'm glad. I hope I can do justice to your work. So we'll see. So but
I'm sure it'll be great.
What I like to do is, as we said before, go start from the beginning and go. The show is basically a pretty deep dive into your career and how you got to where you are. So thank you for joining me. I've been really enjoying the music. I'm familiar with Red Jacket Mine, and it's very funny. And we'll get into things here in a second. But the name Red Jacket Mine, it always confounded me. And
you're not the only one.
Well, the reason for that is because of my dumb brain. I was not thinking mine like miners. I'm thinking mine like possessive.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm like, this is such a strange, like, he really likes that red jacket. I don't know what he named his band after. It's an interesting character. I'm going to have to check this out. So that's kind of where my brain went when I first heard of Red Jacket Mine several years ago. Mm-hmm. So I just kind of felt like I needed to get that out of the way.
Well, you're not alone. The name is the source of much confusion and resultant obscurity. So,
well, all right. So to get to Red Jacket Mine, you had to start playing instruments and playing music somewhere else. You are from Southeast Missouri, if I got that correct. What were you listening to back then that really excited you? Was it something that your parents were playing? Were your parents into music at all? Did they play? How did you get into, even before playing an instrument, how did you really find the music that really started to inspire you?
Yeah, so I grew up in Southeast Missouri mostly. I also lived a little bit in the Kansas City area and then in the Memphis, Tennessee area, Northwest Mississippi to be exact. and southern Arkansas. So all up and down the Mississippi River Valley, really. But I was born in Southeast Missouri and ended up back there around high school time. And I started playing guitar when I was about 13, when I lived near Memphis. And it was, that was the early 90s. And so it was like the alternative rock boom and, Nirvana and Pearl Jam and all those things on MTV.
Oh, yeah.
And so that was the immediate catalyst, right, for wanting to get a guitar and kind of get started. And it was me and several other of my peers all got instruments at the same time. But I think going back a little bit further, I grew up, there wasn't a lot of music in the house. My parents did and do appreciate music, but no one in my immediate family played music at all.
Oh, okay.
My mom did have a guitar from when she was a kid, but she didn't really ever play it. That was the first guitar I played on, though. It was sitting in the closet for most of my childhood. And at one point I got curious and got it out. I still have it somewhere around here. It's it's a 60s German-made classical guitar. Pretty nice little guitar. But, I grew up in the church, in the Pentecostal church, and music is a big part of the services there. And I did have some cousins that played music and were very sort of natural, facile musicians. And I was thinking about it not long ago in an interview, and I think they were a big part of inspiring me and thinking just like, oh, wow, people that I know can do this.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a big thing.
Yeah. Just to see it done. Right. Like I see this person in this mundane setting, and now I see them in this magical setting, right, where they're making music. And so I think that was a big part of it. And I think it's just something always resonated with me at a sort of identity level, of like, if I see people on TV play music, there was just this recognition of like, that's me.
Oh, wow.
Right. And I've heard other people say this too. I think the songwriter who I'm a huge fan of, Joe Henry, I've heard him say something very similar about seeing the Johnny Cash show when he was a kid, and just having that recognition and saying like, it seems so funny for a little kid to be looking at Johnny Cash and say, that's me.
Right.
But I know, but I recognize that feeling in myself too, of just that there's something that's resonating there of like, this is my destiny in one way or another. So I think that had always been stirring in me, but then I got a guitar in my early teens and immediately just kind of jumped into it and took it really seriously.
Okay.
I think it felt like a way out of my circumstances, not in any sort of like financial or career way, but more on the soul level.
It was a safe place for you.
And it was something that could belong to me, right? Okay. It wasn't something that was put upon me or that I was sort of set out for me. And this is your path. Is because no one else in my immediate family played it. It was something that was mine alone.
Okay.
And I think that was a big part of it too.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Were you singing when you started playing guitar too, or did that come later?
It took a little bit for me to get comfortable with that. I mean, and by a little bit, I mean, 25 years. But I think that I don't think I was immediately singing. I mean, we sang in church and things like that as a group, but I think I didn't start taking singing seriously until I was in my, in college probably is when I started to get really serious about songwriting, and then, as a result, singing.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Before you skip over this ad, give me 1 minute. Like most podcasts, I pick sponsors carefully, and I use the products that advertise here. Pure Spectrum CBD is a product that has been really beneficial for me. They have a wide variety of great products that can be used on a daily or as needed basis. I've been using the tincture every day, and it's been wonderful for easing anxiety. And I absolutely love the isolate. I use it instead of acetaminophen or ibuprofen and it's worked so well for the relief of aches and pains. They also have soaks, lotions, salves, gummies, and more, plus an entire line for fitness recovery. They even have products for your pets. See everything they offer at purespectrumcbd.com. And if you have questions, they're there to help. They helped me when I had no idea where to start. After you fill your cart, use code PerformanceANX for 15% off your purchase. Pure Spectrum CBD, Pure Spectrum CBD, Pure Spectrum CBD. So is it one of those things where I'm writing these songs, I'm really the only one that can perform them well, or did you? I've had some people on who were songwriters first and performers second. You know, they were writing, and I'll let somebody else play. I like this, but somebody else can sing better than I can. So, which camp were you in? Were you more of the I'm singing and I'm writing these songs for me, or I'm writing these songs to be played?
I think I probably, from the beginning, was writing songs for myself to sing. Now, you know, I think that over time, my ability to write for my own voice has hopefully improved, and just my comfort level with expressing myself in that way has improved. But I don't think don't get me wrong, there is some allure to the idea of writing songs for other people to sing. And there's a lot of people that I look up to that have done that. But it always felt quite personal to me, right? And so I think that in many ways, I didn't necessarily feel like, even given my inherent limitations, I'm not sure that anyone else was going to be able to do it the way that it needed to be done. So I think it was more about building that skill in myself.
So the performing in church, was that the first public performance you were doing, or had you done other things, that played with high school bands or anything like that?
There was a little bit of that too, but I think that was kind of a concurrent activity. Yeah. Right. Well, I think by the time, once I kind of had gotten a little bit of facility on the instrument, I immediately kind of started playing in church as a part of the praise and worship band, or whatever they would call it. And, I think I learned a lot from that experience of just how to play with other people.
That's a big thing.
Yeah, it is. It really is, right? Because it's one thing to play in your room, but it's another thing to try and sort of gel as a part of an ensemble. And, I think that if I heard the tapes now, I would probably be very, very embarrassed. But there were, I definitely got something out of it. And then just the joy of performing, right? And, kind of making a sound with other people and getting that feedback from the audience. That was my avenue for that, right? In my early life.
When did things shift to, was there a moment, I guess, maybe, where beyond seeing somebody on TV and going, that's me, was there a moment where you're like, okay, this is my career, this is what I'm going to do? I mean, was it, or was that, like you said, was that there from the first time you saw somebody on stage or heard this song on the radio? Or?
I would say, certainly from the first time that I picked up the guitar and I started to be able to make sounds that were recognizable as music,
right?
To me, at least. I think from that moment, that was kind of all there was for me in terms of my vocation, right? Okay. Like what I think I felt from the, early on, like, this is what I do. This is who I am. And then it was just a matter of kind of getting, like I said, building that muscle.
I can empathize with you a bit with my photography, a little bit with that. And I don't do it as a profession anymore, but that actually kind of frees me up to do what I want to do now. So,
right.
But it's something I like, as soon as I picked up the camera, I was just like, this is fun. I want to do this all the time. So, and now with digital, it's much cheaper.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah. When did the idea for Red Jacket Mine come up? Was that a solo thing to start off with? Because I believe I remember hearing that you were writing the songs by yourself and you started off maybe playing as a duo.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's right. So I went to college in Southeast Missouri, and when I entered college, I was already sort of fully immersed in music, but I was more of a guitar player and probably just starting to dabble with writing songs. But I was also.
Let me ask you a question about that real quick, if you don't mind. I don't mean to interrupt, but so at this time, you're going to college. And you know that this is what you want to do for a living. What are you deciding to go to college for? What are you studying?
Well, so I had a scholarship, which was awesome because I did not grow up with a lot of resources.
I know that feeling. I'm working on getting one for Penn State for my daughter.
Awesome.
I'm not even a Penn State fan.
Good luck.
Yeah.
I mean, college is now, I don't have to tell you, now it's so too expensive, right? State school in Missouri wouldn't have been that expensive, but it was still too expensive, right, for my family to afford. But I had done well in high school, and that was, again, talk about an avenue for me to kind of get out into the world and have the life that I wanted rather than the life that was sort of given to me. That was my way, right, of sort of launching into the world. And so I had the scholarship, but I didn't really, like I said, all I'd ever really wanted to do was play music, but I didn't have any formal training in music. I still can't read music like on the staff or anything like that. And I hadn't even really had any guitar lessons at all.
Oh, wow.
And so I didn't have the basis. I wasn't in band in school or anything like that. So I didn't have the basis to study music. So what I ended up studying in college was English and philosophy. And I think that has served me really well in kind of an indirect way. Certainly the writing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've always loved to read and definitely still, a heavy reader. And so that's what I ended up studying. And I think that was great. It was actually probably more beneficial than if I had studied music, because it was I was sort of marinating in ideas.
Okay.
And I was able to kind of build a community, and by bouncing off these other sort of like intellectual type influences, I was able to kind of form my own worldview. Right. And I can't overstate the importance of that period of my life, even though it wasn't a direct path to like, okay, and then now this is how you're going to make a living, or this is, but I met my wife there, and she was hugely influential and person in my life in terms of it, just inspiring me and the encouragement and support, because she recognized me from day one as who I am, and never once wavered, right, in terms of what I intended to pursue.
That's wonderful.
She's still my biggest supporter 23 years later. And so,
which is crazy, because apparently you pointed this out. We share a wedding anniversary.
Yeah, sorry. I know that was really creepy, but I think you were speaking to my friend Nora O'Connor, maybe, yes. and it just happened to be somehow you said something about October 7th, and it was yesterday or something like that, and I was like, could that possibly be true? And October 6th, 2001. That's a auspicious day.
It is. It's apparently, if that's the day you were married, I'm gonna knock on wood. It's gonna work out, at least for 23 years.
Yeah, that much we can be sure of.
Exactly.
No, I know one other couple, a musical friend of mine in Seattle, this guy John Ramberg that sings for a band called the Tripwires. He and his wife Kelly got married on that same day as well.
Oh,
so
my gosh.
There must be something about it.
That's crazy. That is awesome. Well, I don't normally subscribe to dates being important, particularly, but hey, maybe there's something to it in this case.
Yeah, I don't know either. All I know is that I don't know a whole lot, and so
exactly. So all right. So you're in college. You meet your wife. You're studying English. Is that when Red Jacket Mine or the seeds of Red Jacket Mine was formed?
Yeah, it is, because, at that time I was really into a lot of this kind of homemade pop music was what was turning me on my ear at that moment, whether it was things like Guided by Voices or early Elliott Smith or the Elephant Six Collective from Athens, Georgia, or basically, it all centered around the cassette 4-track machine, right? It's like, okay, you can make a record on a cassette 4-track machine. So of course I had to get one for myself. And that's what really jump-started my songwriting. And so I very quickly kind of taught myself how to use that machine and make just the minimally viable recordings on it. But it gave me an outlet, and I was doing it every single day, right?
Oh, wow.
There was a time in that first year or so that I had the 4-track that I would write and record a new song almost every day. And I'm nowhere near that prolific nowadays. But at the time, like, I was really just getting my reps in, and a lot of songs came out of that period. And so pretty quickly, and this would have been 2002, 2003, I started to kind of put together a group of these songs and want to, make a little CD. So I figured out, I downloaded Cool Edit Pro on my PC, and I figured out I got an adapter to take the RCA outs from my 4-track and get it into the computer.
Oh, wow.
And basically just sort of mix down to the digital file and burn CDs and printed out artwork and hand cut them out, right? Like, and made these CDs. And then these are mercifully out of print, I'm afraid to say. But and so at the time I was also really I bristled at the idea of being a singer-songwriter, because I felt like at that time it had connotations that I didn't feel, related to me. Okay. A very kind of like confessional or hard on your sleeve sort of thing. And I was more into these kind of singular personality-driven projects that, while they might have really been one person, they were presented as a band. And I'm thinking of things like Sparkle Horse, who still was just a massive influence. And so I was looking for a name that was evocative without meaning anything, that I could sort of, quite frankly, hide behind, right? I could sort of say, oh, this is a band. Yeah. And kind of I grew into it as a band, right? Like, but the first couple of Red Jacket Mine releases came out in 2003, and those were really just me and the 4-track. The second one did have a couple of contributions from a drummer named Andrew Salzman, who was from that same town in Missouri, Cape Girardeau, that I lived in, but lived in Seattle already. He had moved to Seattle in the late 90s. And he ended up being the drummer in Red Jacket Mine after I moved to Seattle for 13 years. We played together. Wow. But he was just visiting his family, and he was a friend of a friend. And so we set up in their basement, and he cut a few drum tracks. So those were the first contributions from someone that wasn't me on a Red Jacket Mine release. And I continued to play under that name throughout college. I graduated in 2004. And my wife and I moved to Seattle. And it was after that I started to put together Red Jacket Mine as a band. And at first, you're right, that was a duo. Andy and I played together quite, better part of a year as a duo, guitar and drums. But we started to add pieces after that and became a proper rock band.
So you mentioned moving to Seattle. What drew you there? Was there a specific purpose, or was it just, hey, Seattle sounds nice?
I mean, yeah, my wife and I, we always, we didn't want to stay in Missouri. And when I graduated, that felt like our opportunity to make a change. And we had some friends that had lived in Seattle previously. And so that had sort of planted a seed. And we visited once in 2004. And we also went to Vancouver and Victoria, BC, and loved them all. But Seattle just felt right. Mm-hmm. And so we made a plan to make our escape. And yeah, I think, that was really just sort of driven by culture and the sense of sort of discovery, right? Like there were certainly going to be a lot more opportunities for me to meet like-minded musicians in Seattle and venues to play and all these things. And then my wife, she's a psychiatrist. And so at that time she was still doing her undergrad, but the University of Washington was a great program for her to do her biology degree and move on to medical school and things like that. So it was good for her as well. But it was, I think it was largely, quite frankly, a sacrifice that she made so that I could have more opportunities to play music. And, that was Seattle was just so pivotal, right? Like that's where I really made my musical family, and that's where most of them still reside.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I still do most of my work, recording and things like that in Seattle, and so it was just such an important place and time for me at those early days in Seattle.
So when you got there and you're starting to work on Red Jacket Mine, were you playing out a lot as the band is recording and growing from your solo project into a full-on band? I mean, is there
quite a bit. Yeah, we did. I think that we pretty quickly, at that time, the music scene still felt pretty approachable. I'm not sure if I was starting out now, if it would still feel the same in Seattle. I think the stakes of everything are just higher. Like the cost of living is so much higher, and the commercial real estate is so much. And I think that has raised the stakes of just the basic like rock club, how do they make ends meet,
right? And
what needs to happen in terms of people coming in the door and in order to make that viable.
Yeah.
At the time, it just didn't feel as much as competitive and as intimidating. And so, I got a job right after I moved to town at a shop called Emerald City Guitars. And that was really important because that allowed me to make a lot of connections in the music scene, including people that played in the band, and certainly all the bands that we shared shows with. And so, we pretty quickly sort of dove into the local scene. And it took a while to build up a head of steam, but there was a time where we were playing, 50. I mean, this doesn't seem a lot, but for a local band, right? Like maybe 50 plus shows a year in the region, right? So it's pretty steady gigging.
All right. So as a little aside here, I remember hearing the band name is based on an actual mining disaster, an explosion, I think, if I remember correctly. I think, and I heard in another interview, you mentioned that the families of miners, they were not very happy with you choosing that name. What did they ever say? What the reason was?
Well, so I have no personal connection to the Red Jacket Mine, but I believe it was a mine in. I believe actually maybe there have been multiple mines called Red Jacket Mine, but I got it from a song from the Phipps family that was on a Smithsonian Folkways anthology.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And it was called the Red Jacket Mine Disaster. And like I said, I just felt like it felt evocative without meaning anything in particular to me. Mm-hmm. But when Red Jacket Mine put out its second record called Lover's Lookout in 2009, that was the first time that we started to get a little bit of like attention in the press and things like that. And somehow it got on the radar of descendant of one of the Red Jacket Miners, and we got you can probably still find it. We got a review on the iTunes store that said this music does not honor the miners nor their legacy.
What?
And it's a fair cop, right? Like it wasn't intended to.
Well, yeah,
it wasn't intended to dishonor them either, right? But
this is a mining disaster tribute album. It's
right.
This is my band,
right? But you can't please everyone.
No, I mean, I feel like somebody screaming at Soundgarden that their music doesn't honor the sculpture.
Right.
It doesn't make any sense. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. So, anyway, I thought that was interesting. So I love origins of band names. I love finding out how people pick these very interesting names. And then when there's backlash over it always makes me wonder, why? It's just a name.
Yeah.
It's just the name of it. There's no malicious intent behind it. It's an interesting name. And if somebody looks it up, it'll bring attention possibly to whatever they want.
Sure.
Whatever that happens to be, the Red Jacket Mine incident or incidents or
right.
the Soundgarden sculpture. I don't know. But maybe I just try to think of it rationally instead of emotionally.
Right.
But I went back and I was listening to the albums, and it's got this really cool, 70s rock palette to the sound. It's the instrumentation, the composition, vocals, all this classic rock feel to them. And we were talking about iTunes reviews, and the best description I saw, I believe, is from one of those reviews, and it sums it up perfectly. It's a smart blend of power pop and old school soul, shows a reverence for the 70s without resorting to slavish homage. Mm-hmm. I think that is the perfect way. I could try to plagiarize that or rewrite it, but no point, because that's exactly the sound. And there's a really awesome country rock tinge to some of the songs too, which I always love that. That's kind of what I grew up listening to. My dad was a big Flying Burrito Brothers fan and all that stuff.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
So I can hear some of that, and Merle Haggard and all, so I can definitely hear some of those early to mid 70s, even country rock sounds to Red Jacket Mine. And that's kind of one of the things that drew me in.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, I think that the review that you mentioned is probably for maybe our 2013 record, Someone Else's Cake, or perhaps the EP that came after that, Pure Delight. That was when the band really hit its stride. And I think that was, we put out a couple of records, Hello Old Cloud in 2008 and Lover's Lookout in 2009. And both of them, I think, have a lot of great songs and were great experience, recording them and all those things. But I think I was still searching for the lane that I wanted to inhabit as a songwriter. And certainly even just vocally, I think I was still trying to find exactly kind of what my voice was. In 2013, though, we had a couple of lineup changes, and I would attribute the sort of success of that record, Someone Else's Cake, to a couple things. Number one is I started working with a producer and engineer named Johnny Sangster, who's based in Seattle. And I've worked with him ever since. So we've been working together for over a decade now, and probably recorded upwards of 100 songs at this point. Wow. But Someone Else's Cake was the first record we made with Johnny. It also is the first appearance of a gentleman named Daniel Walker on keys. Okay. And Dan's from Oklahoma, and he had moved to Seattle pretty recently at that time, maybe in 2011. And he and I met, and because I had always wanted a keyboard player for our band, but though at that time, especially, it was really, really hard to find someone in Seattle, especially someone that could play convincingly in a rock context.
Oh, really?
Really difficult. Wow. Keyboard players they're very valuable commodity. Yeah. But Dan and I just hit it off immediately, and he went all in with our band, and he just changed everything in terms of the palette that was available, right? For our music. And Dan's been a close collaborator of mine ever since. He's played on every single one of my solo records.
Oh, wow.
He did a bunch of the string arranging on my latest record, and is just one of my closest friends. And so those two people that made their first appearance on that record, Someone Else's Cake. We also had the support from a great, now defunct, but a great fledgling record label in Seattle called Finn Records. And they helped us press vinyl for the first time. They helped us make music videos for the first time. And so those sort of things combined with the band hitting its stride creatively and then getting just a little extra push, I think it enabled that record to be heard by a lot more people. And it's a real confidence builder, right? When you're starting to get the feedback that you crave, it inspires you kind of double down, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And make, take more creative risks and just kind of continue to sort of pursue that. And so the band really, we were really propelled by that energy at that time.
Well, Someone Else's Cake deservedly got a lot of attention because I was listening to it actually this morning. It's still this morning. Like Amy, what? That is a killer opener, man. That's a nice fuzzed out opener.
Sweet nostalgia in the air, and all the judges.
Beller and Bro. That one always gets my tongue tied.
Beller and Ball.
Oh, I'm looking at I'm looking at they've got it misspelled on here.
Oh no.
So that's one thing I've noticed. You need to get after Discogs because they're missing quite a few things for you. And,
really?
And apparently they're misspelling things here because it's. Oh
no!
And I should have known because I was listening to it the other day and watching the video, which I love the video for that song. I love the sense of humor that you guys have. But I should have known it was Beller and Ball, not Brawl. But I'm looking at it on Discogs and they have it misspelled.
Just a sucker for the oldest trick. How in you got no say. You can bet on the ball, but it won't add up to nothing. One more pain in the ass. You can bet on the ball, but it won't make.
But they're also missing the EP, the Pure Delight EP. That's not on Discogs at all. And I also don't see the early singles like you were talking about. So I was missing some information myself. So I got to get on Discogs to update that stuff.
No problem. It's like these all saw very limited release.
Well, I was lucky because I did find Pure Delight on YouTube. So, so it is up there. So I can listen to it at least, which is good. Even though, because I do like to buy things from Discogs, and if it's not on Discogs, it's not on the marketplace either. So
right,
got to figure that one out. But
I might be able, if you like CDs, I might be able to help you out. So we can talk about that after the.
Here's that's just right. What I have right next to me, I've got probably 3,500 in various boxes in the house. So yes, I love CDs.
Awesome.
All right, beyond Discogs mess ups, did the band keep growing because of what you were writing? Because it went, like you said, it went from a duo, and then I saw on the videos from Jupiter Studios, it looked like the band grew to like a 6-piece. Was it because of the music, was the complexity of the music? Because it seems like it's getting more and more lush, a little more complex, a little more instrumentation in it, or was it just, this is just natural. I want this guy in. I want to fill out the sound a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that that's true. I think it was kind of driven by the songs. Now, to be clear, the ensemble that you see on those Jupiter Studios videos, like they weren't playing every show with us, right? Okay. They were assembled. And now all those people pretty much play on the record in one capacity or another. The extra guitar player is Johnny Sangster, who, like I said, is our producer. The extra vocalist is my friend Jefferson Curtis Brown, who is just a very good friend of mine and a great singer. He sang on that record. He's sung on both of my solo albums. And then the horn players, they had played on the record and joined us for that show. So that was sort of like almost like a record release celebration. And so we kind of assembled a bigger band.
Well, that makes sense.
But for the most part, we were gigging as a 4-piece. throughout those years.
Okay. And were you the sole songwriter for Red Jacket Mine, or did everybody else contribute? Okay.
Yeah, no, I was writing all the songs, but then, bringing them to the band for arrangement.
One of the cool things I liked about the band is musically, and it sounds pretty upbeat, but even there's some darkness to it. Like I Sleep Just Fine or NyQuil and Wine, they're a little bit darker, but musically they still sound upbeat.
Soft and kind, sweet berry twins, and NyQuil and wine. Drink it down, feed its design, have another round, NyQuil and wine. Night after night, it helps me to bed. The next day I find it makes me forget.
I always like that dichotomy of an upbeat song with darker lyrics. It makes you listen. It makes me listen more.
That's cool. Yeah. No, I think that's been something that I was drawn to, and I think particularly the songs of that time period maybe have a little bit more cynicism in them than what I'm doing nowadays. Maybe a little bit less vulnerability and a little bit more of that sort of cynical or wry take on the world. And so that felt especially appropriate, I think, probably at that time to kind of cloak those sentiments in a more poppy context.
Were you writing stuff for your eventual solo work at this point? Because this is around the time when the band kind of stops, isn't it?
Yeah, so in 2015, my wife got into medical school. And so we moved to Central Washington, where she went to medical school in Yakima, which isn't very far from Seattle. It's only about 2 hours or so, but it made just like the practical matters of being in an active band a little bit challenging. Sure. And so we didn't immediately sort of close up shop, but it definitely slowed things down. And that period of time, though, coincided with me sort of going through a personal crisis and facing some of the trauma of my childhood in a more head on, kind of precipitated just by some depression and just anguish that was going on that I couldn't quite trace the source of, and it took me a while to figure some of this out. And so as that happened, I started to write in a different way. It was a little bit, like I said, like at that time, a lot of the songs I'd been writing had been very kind of clever and at least attempting to be clever, and very sort of poppy, which I love pop music. Right. But I think I started to kind of get bored with myself because I felt like I wasn't risking a lot in my music. It was all very kind of persona driven and I was only showing what I wanted to show, what I felt, confident and about showing. And, and I felt at a certain point, like, the people that are really compelling as performers and artists, right? Like they're risking something, right? Like they're risking rejection every time they go on stage and I mean, that's always true, but I think that becoming a little bit more conscious of that and sort of saying like, well, what am I putting out there? And because there's some reciprocity in that, right? Like you want the audience to meet you want the audience. And in order to do that, they have to be vulnerable as well. They have to open themselves to what you're putting across. Mm-hmm. And how can you expect them to do that if you're not open? Okay. And I mean, this is all like, analysis in retrospect. I don't think I was thinking of this all that deliberately, but nonetheless, I felt like I had some new things to say that demanded a different sort of lyrical style and a different musical palette as well. And so that, coupled with the fact that it was just more difficult to actually have band practice every week and things like that, that's what got me started thinking about making my first solo record, Trembling Frames, which came out in 2017.
So that came out in 2017. And so I got a couple questions about this because release-wise, anyway, I saw and listened to a lot, not the whole thing yet, but I definitely going back to listen to it. Cruel Dream.
Oh yeah, the film soundtrack.
Yes. How did that happen? Was that like a transitional period between Red Jacket Mine and Trembling Frames, or was that just something that you did during Red Jacket Mine? What is it, and how did it happen? When did it happen?
So that, that was a great project. It came out in 2019, in between my two solo records, but but most of the music was recorded, I think, in 2017. Right after the release of Trembling Frames. So Trembling Frames was recorded in early 2016 and came out in early 2017. And then even like a little bit, the film soundtrack was recorded at the same time that we were doing the release tour for Trembling Frames, and immediately following that. So that project originated, that is, the filmmaker is named Steve Turner, and he's based in Southeast Missouri as well. He's a very close friend of mine for a long time. He was actually my boss in college at the Barnes and Noble in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. and he and I had kept in touch, and he had started to really pursue film very seriously after I had moved away. And so I had contributed some songs to some of his earlier films as well, like songs that were already recorded, Red Jacket Mine material and things like that.
Okay.
But he hatched this idea for this documentary film, The Past Is Never Dead, in the 2016 sort of time frame. And it was about this gentleman, David Lee Robinson from Sikeston, Missouri, who had been wrongfully convicted of a murder and kept in prison for 15 plus years.
Wow.
And the story was just starting to get some attention, and he ultimately was released from prison kind of right before the film was finished. But it was a super important story. I mean, for anyone that isn't from Southeast Missouri, you might think it's Missouri, it's the Midwest. But Southeast Missouri is decidedly the South, in my opinion. For sure. And it has all the baggage of the Deep South. And that's really what this story is about. Okay. It's about institutional racism and the deeply flawed criminal justice system in this country. And so it was a super important story to tell. And it was a great, great opportunity for me to be able to make music that was sort of inspired by the tone and the landscape of the backdrop of this story. Okay. And so I got to play with all the core musicians who've been a part of my last few solo records: John Convertino from Calexico, Levon Henry, great saxophone and clarinet player, Daniel Walker, Johnny Sangster, former Performance Anxiety guest Paul Haraga played keys on a number of songs on that film soundtrack.
Awesome.
And yeah, that was just it was like being in a candy store, right? Like we rented a 9-foot marimba and a vibraphone and a bunch of stuff, and just went wild for a few days.
That is so cool.
It was super fun.
I was listening to it, and I went back to reference it on your website, and I don't know if YouTube has some other tracks, or some of the tracks they're listed as like there's one actually called Cruel Dream, but I didn't see that in the track listing on your website. So I'm not exactly sure which one is which. And it didn't sound like it was on anything that was linked on your website. So I don't know what exactly is going on with YouTube, but they have a song listed as Cruel Dream. Mm-hmm. And that is my favorite. That song sounds so menacing. Fits what you just described the movie as. it sounds like it fits perfectly. It's incredible.
Yeah, that's one of the tracks that Paul plays on. We
cool.
cut that at what used to be Jupiter Studios in Seattle and is now called, why can't I think of the name? Escaping me right now. Don Farwell's the engineer, and he's a great guy. And so we had ducked in, like I said, we were playing a few shows in the Northwest to support the release of Trembling Frames, and ducked into his studio for one day and just cut a handful of tracks, and it was super fun. Cruel Dream was one of them.
Oh, that's one day, man. So that seems to be, if I'm reading some of the history of the music, that doesn't seem to be unusual for you. You go in and you get a lot of things done very quickly. Kind of. Because I also did read that I guess maybe the first song that really triggered Trembling Frames, How to Escape, came to you, but then there really wasn't much for a while after that as far as your songwriting.
I rest my tender back against the pew, but there a strange fixation in me grew. How to escape you?
Yeah, and so I mean, I think there's songwriting, and then there's recording, and usually those two processes aren't super mixed up for me. So songwriting tends to come in seasons for me, right? There are times where I'll write a lot in a very short period of time. Certainly, most of the songs for Trembling Frames, with the exception of How to Escape, were written in a very, like, maybe a 6-week period. And similar for my newest record, Forfeit the Prize, was written mostly in like February, March 2020, immediately before the pandemic kind of really took hold.
Okay.
But when it comes time to record, my MO for the last 7 or 8 years at this point has been to cast the room, to really just bring in the very, very best and most sympathetic and sensitive musicians that I can find, and then work really quickly with very, very little rehearsal or preparation.
Oh, wow.
To really capture the moment of discovery on tape. And rather than having sort of really beaten an arrangement into shape and just sort of having it be a recital, I want it to be a revelation.
Okay. I like that. I like it. Now, you mentioned, you've worked with some of these people for quite a while. The sound on your solo stuff is quite different from Red Jacket Mine.
Mm-hmm.
And it leads me into two questions here. Was that planned, or was it just the natural progression of your writing? And what kind of reaction did you get when you first started playing this out to people who were familiar with Red Jacket Mine?
It wasn't planned. It did feel like a natural progression to me.
Okay.
I think that I'd always been intrigued by more complex and kind of subversive pop songcraft, and the kind of, especially sort of mid 60s or, mid-century pop music that might seem simple on the surface, but then you start to take it apart and you're like, wow, oh, that's only a half verse. And then the chorus starts in a different place on that on the next round. And oh my God, like that's a minor 11th chord, or, you know what I mean? Like, that's always been super intriguing to me. And I honestly think the reason is because the harmonic complexity of some of that music suggests emotions that aren't simple.
Right. Okay.
It's not just happy or just sad. It's all mixed up together. And I know that that's like really reductive, but I think that I've always been drawn to really dense and naughty, Knotty, harmony.
I'm glad you clarified that.
Yeah, I'm not above some naughty harmony as well, but I think that it just felt truer to me. It didn't feel sort of one-dimensional from an emotional and sort of psychological perspective. And so that enabled you to tell stories with more shade and nuance, because the music can pick up where the words leave off from an emotional sort of resonance point of view. So I felt like I had been working at that for a long time, and the music in the songcraft through Red Jacket Mine got progressively more nuanced. But then when it came time to cover the topics that my newer songs were covering when I began to write Trembling Frames, that demanded a whole different set of paints. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there were some light bulbs that went off in that process for me of in terms of how to piece these more classic sort of song forms together, things like voice leading on the guitar, and how some of these standards, like jazz standards, really worked. And I just kind of, I was kind of lighting one off the end of the other, right? For a while of like, and then I figured that out. And now I'm going to carry that into the next song. And so it felt pretty natural to me and very satisfying, of like, okay, yeah, this is something new. This is, I'm surprising myself again, which is kind of the ultimate objective, I think, is to pull something out of yourself that you didn't know was there.
Exactly.
And so I was super excited to present those songs to the world. And I would say that, I got a lot of really great support, but people that had been diehard fans of Red Jacket Mine were probably a little bit taken aback by that 1-2 punch of like minor key jazz ballads and child abuse. It's like not necessarily like something you would put together in a
it's not
focus
chocolate
group.
and peanut butter.
Right. Yeah. Well,
but jazz is pretty dark. So,
but I think it felt more jarring to the audience than it did to me, because I had been there through every sort of like phase of the progression.
Yeah.
And the audience they went from, this. I'd say that the later period Red Jacket Mine stuff was more in the vein of Elvis Costello, Nick Lowe.
Yeah, for sure.
To things like even like the Carpenters, right? Or 70s kind of, pop music. And I saw the thread, right, between that and the newer stuff. But I think, it was probably a little bit shocking and took everyone a little while to acclimate. But the people that I really do believe that music finds the people that it's for. And that continually sort of proves to be the case. So, and the great thing is, like, if anyone prefers the Red Jacket Mine music, all that's still there, right? And no hard feelings, right? Like, that's totally fine. But I felt like I've been really, really fortunate to be able to continually grow and refine what it is that I'm trying to do. And with every record, it's felt more and more true to who I am. And not just as an artist, but as a human being. And I believe that that's going to find its target, even if it takes a long time. Yeah. Or, I'm planting seeds for the future.
So Trembling Frames came out in 2017, and How to Escape was part of that. But there was an EP before that, the Residual Blues.
That kind of came out at the same time. Okay. We had just a few leftover tracks that didn't fit on the record from thematically, but also just in terms of actually wouldn't fit on a record.
Damn it, Discogs. They have that listed as 2016 and Trembling Frames as 2017.
Oh, man. Damn it, I mean, I put them out at the same time. Okay. It was really, I enjoyed those songs and I wanted them to have some sort of life. And so, but Residual Blues is a lyric from the song Tell It to the Judge. and it felt appropriate for some leftover material.
When you're standing accused of residual blues with a beast that will not be.
I'm so fascinated by this because I can't hear it. I don't see any of these songs on YouTube. So I wanted to.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I wanted to.
It's on Bandcamp. You can definitely find it on Bandcamp.
I'll have to go check that out because that's the problem that I have with Bandcamp. It's not a bad problem. It's that when I go and listen to it after a couple of times, then it won't let you, it's like, oh, buy it. And until I can afford to buy it, then, so I don't want to listen to it over and over again and not purchase it. So while I'm researching it, if I can't go pick these things up immediately, I'm like, I got to rely on YouTube. So the question I had about that is Someone to Watch Over Me. Is that the Gershwin song?
It is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So now I'm gonna have to go buy it.
And that song was sort of a key to unlocking some of the sort of song craft that I employed on Trembling Frames. Is I learned that song off of the Blossom Dearie version. Are you familiar with Blossom Dearie?
No.
She's amazing. So was a jazz singer and pianist, mostly active in the 50s and 60s, all up until the 80s. She and I actually share the same birthday, April 28th, which is a big sort of pride for me. But she's an amazing interpreter, and she did a version of that song that really spoke to me, and I learned that off of her record. And that, again, I think just kind of learning the way that song was put together helped me crack, the nut that I was working on to work on some of the songs for Trembling Frames. And so it was actually, Johnny and I had made a demo of that in maybe 2015. And we had shared that with John Convertino when we were talking with him about playing on the record. And so we tracked everything for Trembling Frames in 3 days at a Studio Litho in Seattle.
Wow.
And we had gone out in the neighborhood for a celebratory dinner and drink. And it was still fairly early, it was like 8:00 maybe or something like that. And John was like, there's one other song that we could record. And we're like, really? And he's like, yeah, the Gershwin song. And so we were a little drunk. We all went back to the studio and cut Someone to Watch Over Me. Oh. And I just love the spirit of that version. If you haven't heard it, I'll definitely, I'm sure I have one of those CDs around. I'll mail it to you. But
that'd be amazing.
There's a somebody I'm longing to see. I hope that he turns out to be someone who'll watch over me.
But I love that version of the song, and I love that song. It's just a gorgeous, immortal song.
Did you play out with this stuff a lot? And was that tough? Because a lot of it is very, like you said, very personal, dealing with a lot of issues from your childhood. I mean, is it hard to get up there on a stage and start singing about trauma?
I mean, yeah, it is in a way. It's definitely, I think it's hard. It demands a lot of an audience if it's more than just background music.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
But, I will say though, that it was very nourishing to me to speak or sing about these things publicly, because it was a relief of the burden of secrecy, right? Like when you grow up in an abusive situation, there's a lot of shame and a lot of secrecy around that. And that's what allows those situations to continue. And so finally having the language and the musical vocabulary and the strength to speak about those things and to express those emotions, it was instrumental for me in terms of like my own healing, and I believe for other people's healing, right? Like yeah. I believe that because I'm not alone, right? In this, right? Like there's lots of people, and it looks a million different ways, but I felt like and continue to feel like it's really important to be able to speak about these things as plainly as you can, because it kind of breaks that seal that isolates you when you're in that type of situation. And so I guess what I'm getting at is it is challenging, especially if I'm going to connect with the material emotionally and the audience is going to connect with the material emotionally. It does demand a lot, but it's also a tremendous privilege, and it feels very sacred to me in a way, to be able to and quite frankly, to have survived and have the opportunity to do it in the first place.
Well, I think it's amazing. The honesty in the music, and the fact that you never know who it's going to reach out and touch, mm-hmm. and maybe inspire somebody else to open up about their own issues and maybe go seek mm-hmm. some help where they wouldn't have otherwise. And so I think it's, first of all, it's brave on your part, and it's wonderful, but I think it's also inspiring for anybody. You don't know who it's going to be inspire, but if it just helps one person, then it's it's definitely worth whatever you're doing to get to that point that you're at.
Thank you. I hope so. And I that's definitely what, it's what kind of fuels me to do it and keep discovering, right? Like those layers of meaning in my own story, right? And that's not a one and done sort of situation, right? Like I'm still piecing that together. What does it mean for me? And my perspective on it has evolved a lot since I wrote those songs. I still believe in those songs, and they're very true, but I wouldn't write them the same way today. And that's wow. That's a good thing. Yeah. You know what I mean? That means I'm still growing.
True. And, hopefully you will continue to grow and that everything will continue to grow. You won't look back at them, in another year. You may look at them back differently yet again. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that, your writing style, process, and even point of view now has changed, not just from Red Jacket Mine to your solo work, but from solo album to solo album, from year to year. Do you have a process to your writing? I know you mentioned that you used to write every day, but do you, and you don't anymore, but do you have something that triggers your writing? Is there something that you will sit back and put, maybe I really want to get some new workout. Let me go book a date, and that'll kind of give me a deadline, and now it kind of forces me to write. Do you have any type of process to getting kickstarting your writing?
I've definitely done that. What you described before. I've definitely sort of set whether it's a show or a residency that's coming up or a recording date. I've planned for things like that, and then sort of had to rise to the occasion, and that definitely has worked before. I'll say today, my process involves a lot more rest and reflection than it used to, right? I used to be very, very driven and feel like I have to be writing right now or else I'm a sham. You know what I mean? I think I've learned to be a lot more gentle with myself in the last few years. And part of that just comes with time and maturity. There's the confidence of like, no, when the time comes, the material will be there, right? Like, and I'm always writing even when I'm not writing. Okay. You know what I mean? Those fallow periods, seemingly, they have just as much value for me as the periods of activity. Although the periods of activity are much more fun. You know what I mean? Like, it's fun to be caught up in that, right? And as I sort of said earlier, like lighting one off the end of the other, there's nothing beats that feeling. But you can't do that indefinitely, right? Like, you have to stop and you have to take in new material as well.
True.
Just practically speaking, almost all the songs on my new record started with vocal melodies, and I had never really written in that way before. A lot of times I'd started on the guitar.
Yeah.
I very rarely start with lyrics, but I previously had started most of my songs with the guitar in hand and come up with a chord progression and then married a melody to that and then lyrics. I started a lot of the songs on the new record, though, without the guitar in hand. And that was, I think that enabled me to break out of some patterns melodically. And then once I had what I felt like was a strong melody that may or may not have been accompanied by, snippets of lyrics, I could then set about kind of building the backdrop, the chords and things that would support that melody. And that worked out really well for this record. I have no idea how I'll write the next one, but I trust that will come.
Something will happen. So
yeah.
Well, I love the sound that you've created on Trembling Frames, and I love the sound on Forfeit the Prize. I mean, you've got this really cool, and I almost hate to use these names because they're names that people throw out a lot, but it's like almost like Bacharach meets Lynch. In this.
Oh yeah,
it's such a cool sound.
That should go on the sticker on the front.
But like Memory Up and Die.
Yeah,
that's just a crazy song. I think that's my favorite off of Trembling Frames. I love that. The vocal effect is just wild. I love that.
Thank you.
Memory up and down me. Memory up and down me. Memory up and down.
So the new album, Forfeit the Prize, that is a little more of a lush production, I would say. You've got maybe more expansive. I'm not exactly sure the right, because you've incorporated some things that and what sounds like you purposefully avoided in Trembling Frames, some strings and things. And more lush background vocals with former podcast guests Kelly Hogan, Nora O'Connor, and Casey McDonough of Flat 5 and NRBQ and Nico Case. So first of all, I guess, did you purposefully avoid that stuff for Trembling Frames? And why did you decide that now would be a good time to make things a little more lush and broaden the musical instrumentation on it?
Yeah. So I think I did purposefully eschew those things when I wrote and recorded Trembling Frames, because maybe it felt like it was a little bit too on the nose.
Okay.
Like I was already making such a aesthetic shift
True.
that it felt like if I go ahead and I smother these things in strings, it's going to feel kitschy or something, right? Like, and I wanted to kind of make something that was fairly, there's still a lot of texture and layers in that music, but I didn't want to, gild the lily too much, right? Like I wanted it to be, and so that was why I avoided it the first time around. I was like, I didn't want it to just feel like a genre exercise. I wanted to keep it still, very personal and raw in a certain sense of that word, right? You know what I mean? But when I wrote the songs for Forfeit the Prize and started to think about recording those, there's a couple things, right? Like number one, I felt like I had come more fully into my own voice with these songs. So I didn't feel as self-conscious, I guess I would say, about if I put strings on these, or if I make whatever production choice I need to, what does it mean? What is it going to say? What will people think? Right. Like, I think I just felt more confident in general.
Okay.
I also felt that the worldview or the point of view in these songs was inherently more expansive, and possessed more perspective, a broader perspective. And I felt like I wanted to portray that in the music as well, right? Like I wanted the aperture to be wider, you know what I mean? Like,
okay. Yeah.
and that felt like there could be more sonic information to kind of embellish what was going on inside the songs. And then I think the last thing that I never thought of until just now, but I don't think is off base, is I think I just felt like involving more people in this record. And I mean, that's all part of the same thing of like opening myself up to the world, to possibility, to the unknown, and embracing that and wanting to share that with other people, right? Like Trembling Frames was still a very collaborative record, but it was a much tighter group of people.
Yeah.
And something about, you know, these songs and then recording them coming out of the worst part of the pandemic, I think I wanted to share it with as many people as possible. And having a broader palette and bringing in strings and additional background vocals and whatever enabled me to just bring more people to the party.
Kept believing when our hero came up short. Finally, my reach was tempered by the modesty of mine. I grasp it's a miracle of sorts, as if waking up were a feat enough. A recast on.
So you mentioned the pandemic. Between albums, we had one.
Yeah.
And you'd mentioned, you know, being depressed and having the depression with the last album. The isolation and lockdowns, was that difficult? I mean, or were you in a better frame of mind to handle the pandemic, and did the music help you through any of that?
Yeah, I feel really fortunate that 2020 found me in a much, much better place psychologically than and emotionally than I had been in, you know, back when I wrote the songs for Trembling Frames. Mm-hmm. Just a lot of personal growth, right? Like, and healing had taken place, and it's still right, like ongoing. But no, I felt much, you know, I think, and this might even be in the bio that my friend Kurt Riley helped me with for this record. But in 2020, I felt like there was so much less to enjoy for obvious reasons in life, but I felt infinitely more capable of enjoying it. So I feel really, really fortunate in that time was a lonely time, like I think it was for everyone, mm-hmm. but it was also an immensely like nourishing and fertile time for me.
Okay.
From an interiority perspective. And I was able to I was happy when I was able to be out in the world again. Right. And making this record was a real expression and celebration of that. But no, I mean, I feel really lucky. To answer your question. I didn't struggle with a lot of sort of depression or some of the things that had plagued me in years prior during the pandemic. And I'm really grateful for that, because it would have made a difficult time much, much, much more difficult.
Exactly. Now, the new album, I think one of my favorites on the album is the opener, Miracle of Sorts.
Oh, cool.
I love that. I love the background vocals. You know,
yeah.
The whole song, it's just a beautiful song. Everything is so full sounding And that's one of the things I really enjoyed about it is just there's a connection between Trembling Frames and Forfeit the Price, but it's definitely its own album. It's not just a continuation. And I think that's what I liked about it. Like, for example, what is this song? Only an Idiot. I love that song. I love the background vocals, the whole thing. It sounds like it's got this great like 70s Laurel Canyon kind of vibe to it, which I grew up listening to that stuff, so I had an immediate connection to it.
To choose to die upon a magic mountain rather than concede defeat. There's no accounting, forfeit the prize. Locked inside a fortress of certainty. Training his size, fast upon the treasure beyond. Consider the price to dwell in this precarious state and still hazard an idiot's fate.
The strings throughout the whole thing, it's just an amazingly well written and beautifully performed album. And
thank you.
Are you taking it out on the road? Are you playing locally? Are you doing it? Are you going to tour with it? And how do you manage the interesting assortment of sounds? Because you've got strings on there, you've got reeds, woodwinds. How do you translate that into a live setting? Is that something that you think of when you're recording and writing, or do you just worry about that later?
I don't think I think about it a lot when I'm recording or writing. However, I will say that even though there are a lot of layers on the record, the core of the record and Trembling Frames as well is a live performance in a band. Like, basically we track, guitar, bass, drums, keys, and lead vocals live to tape.
Oh, cool. And
so having that foundation, and right, like that's your proof of concept right there, right? In terms of, right, and then you can embellish that, and we do, and on the new record quite a lot, but that demonstrates that the song can be realized, right? Like with those sort of basic ingredients. And we have done some touring around this record. The record came out in October of 2022, and we did a handful of shows in the Northwest, which I mentioned, right? Like it's still where the majority of my community resides.
Yeah.
And so we played a handful of shows, full band shows supporting the record release back then. And then in March of 2023, just a couple months ago, I did a week or so of dates in the Midwest, including a great show with the Flat Five in Evanston, Illinois. And that was with Daniel Walker, who I mentioned, on keys, John Convertino on drums, and Johnny Sangster on baritone guitar. And there's actually a great video on YouTube called Live at Weird Stuff Antiques that we recorded when we were in Kansas City. And so that's a great little document of that band, right? Which is, a subset of the band that plays on the record, but I think had some magic all of its own, just with that lineup. And so we did that. And then, every show's a bit different, right? Because I live in South Carolina. John lives in El Paso. Johnny and Dan live in Seattle. It's rare that everyone can be in the same place at the same time. Yeah. We are doing a show in August in Seattle, August 24th at the Royal Room in Seattle with the string quartet, led by Andrew Joslin, who did some of the arranging and all the performance on the record. He's putting together an ensemble that's going to back us up. So basically all the players from the record plus Andrew and his string quartet are going to be performing with us in August. So I'm really looking forward to that. That'll be actually my first show with strings.
Oh, wow.
And so I think that'll be a lot of fun.
The Live at Weird Stuff, that is such a cool, I'm going to say piece that you did. The, what the hell is the name of the song? Safe for Dreaming.
We're never past redeeming in a bed that's safe for dreaming. I know just where to find you in my dreams. Ever toward, half down forward, who would choose to sail alone? Danger looking all uncertain.
Uh-huh.
I love that version. And if I remember reading correctly, that was the first song you wrote for Forfeit the Prize. Now, it sounded like it almost went through a similar process as Trembling Frames, where you had one song and then nothing for a little while, and then the rest came in a burst. Was that the same type of
I think
situation?
that pretty much is true. Yeah. There's only one other song on the record that predates that, and that's the song called Lion's Paw.
Delusions were hid for all to be entertained. The lion's paw, the dragon's maw, all the same. I know what I saw. Blind in pain.
That song was written actually when I still lived in Pendleton, Oregon in 2019, but it's sort of between records. But yeah, it was a similar process where I had kind of this long period of not a lot, a period of drought, and then I wrote Safe for Dreaming, and that provided like a glimmer of like, okay, this could point the way to the future, but it didn't immediately all, come flowing after that. There was still a few more months of searching before I really, got on a roll.
So it sounds like you get, like you mentioned, a glimmer of hope before the floodgates open. So it takes a little while, and then the songs come after. Yeah, you prime the pump, I guess, maybe with
right.
A song.
Yeah, I think that I mean, yeah, I it's hard to know exactly how it works, but that is how it has worked at least a couple of times.
Yeah, and there's nothing saying that it's going to happen for the next one, but who knows? So, are you in the process of writing now, or in the process of supporting the latest album? Where are you at professionally, I guess? What's your focus right now?
Yeah, so I'm still pretty focused on promoting Forfeit the Prize, but I am starting to think about writing again. That's generally the way that it really starts. Is I start to feel like a stirring and a curiosity and almost like an itch, right? That I need, that there's something that needs to be explored or expressed. But it might be months, right? You know what I mean? Before anything actually sort of comes to fruition. Right. But, I've got the feeling that I'm going to be, I'm going to start writing again in earnest pretty soon. But right now, I really am proud of this record, and I really want as many people as possible to hear it. And so I'm pretty focused on spreading the word and in playing shows and things like that as much as I can.
I love it. I'm so glad I got a chance to listen to it, because it's a lot different from what's in my daily rotation. And I imagine it's a lot different for what's in most people's daily rotation because of that jazzy Bacharach / David Lynch feel. It's a wonderful escape. It's a wonderful change, because I get tired of, as much as I enjoy rock, heavy music, but I can't do that all the time. I need something different. Like you were just talking about something to spark the creativity, and I need I need stuff like Linkin Barr to spark the creativity and get me interested in doing something different with what I'm doing in my own life. So I want to thank you for being brave enough to do something that's different, finding your voice and making the music that you want to make. It's inspiring, and it's a beautiful piece of work. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Mark. It's such a privilege. It's a privilege to be able to do it and to continue to do it and be surrounded by such an amazing and supportive community of just incredibly talented and kind people, right? Like that is so rewarding, right? And then there's an attraction that happens with, when that sort of love gets captured, right? Like on a record, I think that it attracts more of it, right? And so I'm really pleased and really humbled by your sentiment, and I'm really, I think I said in something around the release of the record that there was a joy to make it, and that I hope that joy can make its way into the people that hear the record and fuel whatever it is that they're searching for. You know what I mean? And if the music's doing that, even on the one-on-one level, then I'm really grateful.
Well, you said at the beginning, you think music finds its people, and I think you're right. And I think people find their people, which is why you've got such an amazing group of people around you, like 3/5 of the Flat Five, Johnny Sangster. You've got some amazing people working with you. You're writing amazing music, and I think that that's one of the things that draws me into it, is that it's honest and it's different and it's just fun. Even though some of it is a little dark, but it's not doom and gloom dark. There's hope in this music, and you deal with some issues, but it's hopeful, and I love it. So thank you so much for being on the podcast, for spending, we've been doing this for an hour and a half now, for spending so much time with me, and for dealing with my medical issues. Stupid teeth.
No, like I said, Mark, it's a real privilege. I appreciate the time and the care that you put into these conversations. I've really enjoyed listening to the podcast, and I'm going to keep doing it. And
Thank you so much.
Look forward to sharing this conversation with my friends.
I lit the fuse, I primed the star, I played confused, behaved as if I had no part. I hurled abuse to fell the faint of heart. I chalked it up to the vicissitudes of art that might have worked, it had before. The similarities were too much to ignore. A wiser man would have anticipated more, if not a war.